meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the March 8th, 2021 meeting of the City of Raleigh Board of Adjustment. My name is Rodney Swink and I'm chair of the board. I'm joined by fellow board members John Kuntz, Donald Mile, Kathy Rudisell, Justin Sutton, Marvin Butler, Stephen Kinney, and Michael Rainey. The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by the North Carolina General Statutes and the city's Unified Development Ordinance. We conduct evidentiary hearings on requests for variances, design adjustments, design alternates, and special use permits, among other requests. The Board of Adjustment assures that the due process rights of the parties are protected when hearing cases. Since today's meeting will be conducted remotely, in addition to the general quasi-judicial rules, today's hearings will be conducted in accordance with state statutes that allow for remote quasi-judicial evidentiary hearings during the current COVID-19 states of emergency. All presentations, documents, exhibits, or other materials that will be submitted at today's evidentiary hearings were posted online in board docs prior to this meeting. These materials can be viewed at any time during today's meeting by visiting www.raleighNC.gov/board-adjustment and clicking the link to view the agenda. If at any time a participant has issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator. Chat function has been disabled for this meeting for all participants and the board members, except for the ability to message the moderator if you have technical difficulties. Before we begin the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda, I ask our attorney to briefly explain for the participants how we will be conducting today's evidentiary hearings.
Thank you. My name is Janie Richardson, and I'll be the attorney for the Raleigh Board of Adjustment today. Today's evidentiary hearings will proceed very similar to a regular meeting with a few minor adjustments. First, all witnesses must be sworn in. Because of the remote format, individuals who signed up to speak, as well as city staff participants, have already signed a written oath form, which will be reaffirmed on the record as they testify today. The participants have also already provided written consent to today's remote meeting. If any participants have not provided a written oath form or consent, we'll swear those participants in and obtain their consent prior to beginning the applicable hearing. We will begin with a staff presentation and report from a member of the planning department. As a reminder, the standards the applicant must meet for approval are in the UDO. They are also set forth in a staff report and the applicant's application. The standard will be discussed by staff and the applicant throughout the hearing. The burden is on the applicant to provide competent material and substantial evidence as to each of the required standards to be granted the request. Following staff's presentation, the applicant will be acknowledged to present their case and witnesses. The board will acknowledge the attorney or applicant for each case first as the point person for the applicant. Following the applicant, any opponents will be given the opportunity to speak. The applicant then has the opportunity for any rebuttal and/or closing statement. When all testimony is complete, we'll close the evidentiary hearing. The board members will then deliberate and vote on the case. Following the meeting, the board's decision will be prepared with written findings of fact and conclusions of law. The decision will be incorporated into today's meeting minutes and will be adopted at the same time the meeting minutes are adopted.
We will now conduct the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda. As our attorney noted, the standard the applicant must meet to be granted their request is set forth in the UDO, and the board's decisions must be based upon competent, material, and substantial evidence related to the applicable standard. In the interest of efficiency, if you will be speaking in a hearing today, please focus your testimony and arguments on the applicable standard, not personal preference or opinion. Witnesses may testify as to the facts to which they are competent to testify, so long as those facts relate to the legal standards. In addition, lay or non-expert witness testimony is limited to facts, not opinions. Focusing your testimony and arguments on the applicable facts and standards will allow the board to hear cases in an efficient and timely manner. So let's begin with evidentiary hearing 1. This is 326 Golf Course Drive. Carrie Alcock is the property owner. It's a special use permit, BOA-0072-2020. I'll begin by swearing in our staff. Keegan McDonald, planning staff case presenter.
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Justin Romero, zoning administrator.
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Now, to our participants, as I call your name, please restate your name for the record and your address, and I will reaffirm your oath. Carrie Alcock, applicant.
Carrie Alcock, 326 Golf Course Drive in Raleigh, 27610.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. McDonald, you're up.
Thank you. I'll begin, by just providing a brief overview of the request. This is for a special use permit pursuant to sections 543A, 543F6, and 1029 of the UDO to expand an existing detached house by 352 square feet, where such expansion will encroach 42 feet into the 76-foot minimum required front yard setback on a 0.55 acre property zoned R4 and NCOD King Charles South. And the property is located at 326 Golf Course Drive. So as you can see, here is the subject property. It sits at the end of a cul-de-sac within this King Charles South neighborhood. The underlying zoning is R4, but the overlay district sets in place certain other regulations. For those unfamiliar, neighborhood conservation overlay districts, as the name implies, are intended to preserve neighborhood character. When the overlay was applied, generally speaking, approximately 70% of the homes had to conform to the adopted standards. In this case, they have a fairly substantial front yard setback of 76 feet. I will note, and as shown on the upcoming survey, the existing principal structure does not abide by that specific setback. And the NCOD section of the UDO does lay out specific allowances for expansions that don't conform to the NCOD standards, recognizing that a substantial percentage might not conform when the NCOD is first applied, and wanting to allow modifications to be made to the homes that are deemed reasonable. And really that threshold is 25% of the existing floor area. So the expansion, and here is the survey, and I'll show you a zoomed in version. The expansion will be roughly 22 feet by 16 feet. It is shown in the top corner of the image, I'll highlight it for you all. Right here is the addition. So this specific addition is what's being considered today. It's again roughly 22 feet by 16 feet. It equates to about 24% of the existing floor area of the principal dwelling. And so they are seeking a special use permit to achieve this specific addition. The expansion will have a setback of approximately 34.3 feet from the closest corner to the edge of Golf Course Drive. And again, I just want to note that the existing principal structure has a setback of 55.7 feet, so still less than the required 76 feet. Staff does not have any comments on this specific application. I am happy to answer any questions, and if not, I can pass it over to the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald. Board members, any questions? Okay, hearing none, let's now move to the applicant. Please note that you must present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. Any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. So you may proceed, Ms. Alcock, with your presentation.
I don't have an actual presentation. I just submitted the documentation on the application. Was I supposed to have a presentation as well?
Not necessarily. Many people do. I certainly, was your option. Do you have anything that you wish to tell us about your proposal?
Just that it's going to include a bathroom and a master suite, and it's going to improve our standard of living when it comes to living in a one-bathroom home. with my husband for the last 10 years. So really, we just wanted to make this our forever home, and then, make it perfect for us to grow old together in.
Okay. Okay, there were no additional participants signed up to speak either in favor or in opposition to this. So any board questions? Anyone? No? Well, okay, we can move right along. If there are no board questions, Ms. Alcock, I trust there's nothing further from you to say?
No, sir, thank you.
Okay, Mr. McDonald, anything further from you?
Nothing really further. I actually, just to share my screen one more time, just to give the board some perspective, these are photos from the tax record showing the existing dwelling on the right, and I believe a detached garage on the left, but just to give you an idea of the context. And so the addition would be added to the principal structure shown on the right. It would come off kind of the right portion of the home towards the front of the property.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, if there's no further comment or questions, we'll close the evidentiary hearing and move to board deliberations or a motion.
I make a motion we approve.
Thank you, Ms. Russo. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Mile, thank you for a second. We have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, Mr. Puccini, let's move to a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, sir. On the motion, Ms. Rudisil?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Kuntz.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
Thank you. That makes 5, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Alcock. Okay, let's move to the evidentiary hearing number 2. Our attorney will conduct this hearing.
Thank you, Chairman Swink. This is for 122 Ash Avenue. The property owner is Mark Segre. Its variance is BOA-0003-2021. Before we start, I believe there were 2 persons signed up in support of this case, and I'm only seeing 1 person now on the meeting, and that would mean we're missing Mr. Henry Bataller. I would like to confirm with the applicant, Mr. Seagrave, that he still wants to proceed with his case without the 1 person who is missing in support.
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great, thank you. So as I mentioned, Mark Seagrave is the property owner, and he'll be presenting his case. We have 1 person now signed up in support of this case, and 2 people signed up to speak in opposition. We'll swear everybody in prior to their opportunity to speak, and we'll start with staff's presentation. Keegan McDonald is the staff presenter in this case.
All right, thank you. So this is a variance request by Mark Seeger. The subject property is 122 Ash. The request is 2 parts. It's for a 1.2 foot variance from the side lot line setback requirements set forth in 224B3 of the Unified Development Ordinance to construct an approximately 740 square foot 2nd story addition in conjunction with an existing 3-unit apartment building that results in a side lot line setback of 1.2 feet and a variance of 3.5 parking spaces from the parking requirements set forth in UDO sections 711B and 712C for multi-unit living to provide no on-site parking in association with 2 one-bedroom units and 1 2-bedroom unit. The property size is about 0.11 acres. And there is also a special residential parking overlay district, which is not relevant to the specific request, but just for your information. So there is some considerable history here to understand and put this in a little bit better context. So this specific property is located near NC State's campus, south of Hillsborough Street, north of the railroad track. And it's part of a collection of residential structures that are now zoned R10. It was constructed in 1912. The tax record lists it as a triplex, which the code recognizes as an apartment building. And prior to the UDO, the property was zoned, I believe, special R30, which allowed for this specific density, this 3 units on this size property. However, during the citywide remapping, this home amongst or in addition to the ones surrounding it, were rezoned to R10, and that was out of special concern that the new mixed-use districts did not appropriately cap density. So they really wanted to limit what could be constructed here. And of course, the existing structures are allowed to remain in existence as kind of non-conforming, legal non-conforming structures. So that kind of sets up this specific request. The applicant is looking to expand the second story unit. The last updates to at least that unit and potentially even the others were in the 1960s. They cite in their application that they are looking to redo and update electrical and plumbing work, add space for HVAC, and remove some of the partitions and knee walls that are in the second story unit specifically to make it more marketable and also more hospitable to future tenants. The expansion will be more than 25% of the existing floor area of the apartment building. And so the request comes in 2 parts. First being they are expanding the amount of conditioned space that will be encroaching further into the setback than what's allowed. A caveat for the board to recognize is that apartment buildings at present are allowed to be either at 0 feet or 6 feet. And so the understanding is that at 0 feet, you would be immediately adjacent to your neighbor, meaning there'd be a firewall of some sort. At 6 feet, of course, there would be some minimum kind of separation maintained. So that's kind of why they are requesting the variance. Again, they will be, even in expanding the structure, they will be keeping in line with the existing sidewall as shown here in the image where that 1.2 foot setback is. So it's the east property line along here. And so they will be maintaining that same setback, but again, they're adding square footage, which is requiring the variance. It's also important to note that in increasing the floor area by greater than 25%, they are also held to providing parking for the existing and proposed use. In this case, it's still going to be multi-unit living, but they do propose to convert the second story unit into 2 bedrooms instead of just 1. And so the multi-unit living parking standards require 1 space for every 1 bedroom unit and 1.5 spaces for every 2 bedroom unit. So that's a 3.5 space requirement. The code considers half spaces to be a full space in terms of what actually needs to be provided. So in effect on the ground, it would be 4 spaces that they would have to provide. They're essentially looking to maintain the existing conditions where there is no on-site parking. So the UDO and previously old code have had standards for multi-unit living. However, this site, this property, and others in the neighborhood have historically relied on street parking to meet their parking needs for the tenants and the occupants. Here is the home as shown in the top. That's the existing condition. Shown below is what's proposed. So they are looking again to expand that second story unit. And it will keep in line with the existing sidewall of the current structure. But again, that's at a non-compliant setback of 1.2 feet. And I did just want to show one other image. This is to the rear and side of the property. So the home shown to the left where that car is parked in a driveway, that's kind of the rear neighbor. And then the space in the backyard is the subject property's rear yard where this kind of concrete block wall is. And the reason I'm just showing this image is it relates specifically to the request for complete relief from the parking requirements. Staff does understand that this property has historically relied on available street parking, as you can see in this image, but just wanted to note that they are increasing the parking requirement by creating a second bedroom in that upstairs unit. And so just based upon the geometry and dimensions of the lot and specifically the rear yard, it does appear that potentially a space or two could be provided there to achieve closer to compliance with the parking requirements of the code. It's not clear that 3 spaces could potentially be provided, but possibly 1 or 2. And so those are our principal comments related to the applicant's application. They do have a pretty in-depth presentation as well, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Does the board have any questions for Mr. McDonald? Okay. Mark Seagrave will now present evidence in support of his request. As a reminder to the applicant, any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. Mr. Seagrave, please state your name and address, and Chairman Swink will swear you in.
My name is Mark Segra. I live at 301 Duncan Street, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27608.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Segra, you may proceed with your presentation now. And just as a reminder, I know that your presentation and exhibits were provided ahead of time and are in board docs, but can you please ask to have them admitted into the record as needed?
Okay. Oh, I see. Presentations here. You can go ahead and flip. First of all, thank you for having me here. I especially want to thank Keegan McDonald, who helped me navigate through here. And I did end up with a fairly long presentation, kind of templated from a previous one that was similar that I saw in one of your board meetings. I'll try not to go into too much detail and certainly not read the slides. So I think as Keegan kind of presented the overview, what I'm looking to do is legalize what's already there. This house was built over 100 years ago, and as far as I can tell, not updated at least since 1960. It has quite old infrastructure, still has galvanized steel pipes that are full of rust, and so I'm having trouble with the plumbing. Some of the electric is as old as knob and tube, and so I've been trying to slowly upgrade some of that. And also remove the natural gas space heaters, which I feel are a hazard, and put in some air conditioning, but I do need to have some room to put those units in. As far as I can tell, and I do have a letter that we can put into evidence. I think it's part of the package, that a notarized letter from a tenant that grew up there in the, I think, 60s or 70s possibly, but and knew apparently the person that originally built the house, and as far as she knows, and she's been told, that this was always a 3-unit apartment building. I do not actually have, I should have taken the last bullet off of here. I've talked to several of the neighbors, but after talking to Keegan, I was told that the statements would not really be all that relevant, so I do not have the statements. So we can go ahead and move on. Again, this is the letter that I have. There's a notarized copy of this in the portal. It's from Donna. Her actual last name is Cox. She's been, Sorrell was a previous name. And as it states, as far as she can tell, when she lived there in 1948, it was certainly a triplex, and she believes it was built that way. Go ahead and advance. So goals are simply to legalize what's there, eliminate the hazards, and really I'd like to avoid either tearing it down or turning it into a single-family home. Certainly properties down there are somewhat valuable, but I'm trying to be committed to maintaining some preferably fairly affordable housing there. You can kind of see the conditions of the current apartment, which I think lead to the conclusion that it truly has not been touched since 1960. I'll go ahead and move on. As Keegan said, the structures in the area are very similar. You'll see in the next slide, which I think we could probably go to. This just, well, the one thing I wanted to show here is that it's a very common kind of layout for the area. There's quite a few. The numbers there show you how many dwellings each of the structures is zoned for, and you can see that many of the dwellings are right on the property line. Many of the dwellings do not have parking, and et cetera. So we can go on to the next slide. Again, I think just highlighting what Keegan's already told you, that this is kind of a little island that was created of R10 zoning, but in general, this area is multi-use zoning and it has actually much more density than on this property. This was fairly recently done, I think between 2013 and 2015 is my understanding. One was the UDO adoption. I think the rezoning actually happened after that. It's the best of my knowledge. I won't attest that it's absolutely those dates. So we can go ahead to the next slide. Survey, and probably advance one more to zero in on what Keegan's already shown you. This is where the house sits. It's sat there for the last 100 years. There's not really a lot to be done about that. Go ahead and move ahead. Just wanted to show that, you know, in other ways, going to conform to all the current zoning. It's not going to be over any height limits or any of the other issues that may have arisen as a result of zoning changes. Go ahead and move ahead. This is just the layout of the second floor. Again, as Keegan said, there's, although by removing the dormers, there'd be more space, but the footprint of the actual house will not change at all. Go ahead and move ahead. Again, there's no changes to the setbacks. In fact, it's already 2 stories at the property line. And I just have a couple of pictures of other areas where this is a common setback in that neighborhood. Go ahead and advance. So here's my official request, just to legalize the existing conditions of the 3 units, the setback and the parking. Go ahead. Oh, this is just an introductory slide. So in accordance with what I'm supposed to be presenting here, I just want to, you know, show that I meet the requirements of the variance, that there is a hardship, and that the house was built really almost 100 years before the zoning was put into place. As far as parking spaces, you know, cars weren't even really around when it was built. And my goal, this is really required in order to create a clean, safe, and usable space. I really have to update all of the infrastructure and somehow need to pay for that. Go ahead. You know, as far as the conditions being peculiar to the property, I think that, you know, there's really not a whole lot to be said. It's these decisions result from things that were decided many years ago, and nothing has been changed in many, many, many years. Many of the homes, again, what's peculiar to this property is actually kind of common in the neighborhood. Go ahead. Certainly, I've become a recent owner. I've done nothing to change anything that has been done on the property, or I didn't take any actions to change anything, and I'm not trying to increase the degree of nonconformity and trying to just make what is there usable. Go ahead and advance. No, it's consistent. I think it's, again, just bringing it up to code and eliminating the hazards. And I have talked to my immediate neighbors and they didn't have any objection. And I think that probably brings us to the last slide, I hope. And that's the conclusion that I'm just requesting a variance and summarizing the conditions. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Segrete. Can you just go ahead and ask that those be admitted into the record if you would like your presentation to be?
Yes, could you please put into the record both the presentation and the letter that's showing that the units, that the structure has always been this degree of nonconformity, or I guess it was conforming at the time it was built.
Well, technically, Mr. Segrete, that is considered hearsay. And so if there is objections from those folks here in opposition, I would ask that they, state whether or not they object to that now. And I don't know if we can have them unmuted. That would be Miss Alice Harvey and Mr. Mike Iverson.
Yeah, and these are not the folks that I talked to. I had talked to my immediate neighbors.
Understood. Do we have Miss Harvey or Mr. Iverson?
Yeah, Mr. Iverson's here. Mike?
Mr. Iverson, do you have any objections to that letter being admitted into the record?
I do not.
Okay. Miss Harvey, are you available?
Ms. Richardson, I don't see Ms. Harvey on.
Oh, okay. In that case, if the board would like to consider the letter, they can, if they think it's sufficiently trustworthy at that point, but we'll go ahead and admit it into the record. Okay, does the board have any questions for Mr. Segrete? Okay, with that, like I said, we had 2 people signed up in support, but I believe only one is here now, and that is Mr. Tim Leitz. Mr. Leitz, can you please state your name and address, and Chairman Swink will swear you in.
This is Tim Leitz. I live at 120 Ash Avenue, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27605.
Mr. Leach, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Leitz, we did not receive your consent form. And so if you could go ahead and let us know whether or not you consent to the remote meeting format today, that would be appreciated.
Yes, I do, Ms. Richardson. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And you can go ahead and with your presentation.
Well, I don't have a presentation. I just have a couple of speaking points, if that is okay.
Yep, that's fine.
Point for you.
Understood.
For the record, I am the neighbor that lives right next door to Mark's house. We've lived in this house for 10.5 years, so we know the property well. We actually have been inside the property a number of times and know the condition of it, so we fully support Mark's wish to renovate as much as he wishes to do. It truly has not been touched, I think, at times since 1960. We fully support the renovation. We do have 2 concerns, and I also will let my neighbor across the street, Mike, who I believe is on as well, speak to his thoughts. And unfortunately, Alice Henry, who had registered, is not able to somehow connect to the meeting today. But she also had some thoughts as well about the proposed plan. A couple of things maybe that I could ask, if it's okay, Ms. Richardson, to have maybe Keegan clarify. We are under the impression that we are zoned as R10 and we are not a multi-use neighborhood. Is that correct?
Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, sure. I can speak to that. So you are correct. I mean, the zoning of the subject property, and I believe your property and adjacent properties, is R10, which is principally residential.
Thank you for clarifying. I believe Mark might have just mistaken when he spoke during his presentation, saying that we were multi-use or mixed zone. The other thing I did want to clarify also, if possible, Keegan or Mr. McDonald, we do not have a residential parking overlay as a neighborhood in place yet. Okay, we are talking about putting that in place, but we do not have one yet. Okay, is that correct?
I will try my best not to confuse maybe the two concepts, but Mr. Leeds, are you referring to a parking permit system for the residential neighborhood?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, yes. I couldn't speak to the specifics of that. I would entrust that you have the most up-to-date knowledge about a petition to create a parking permitting system in the neighborhood. What I was referring to is a zoning regulation that specifically places guidelines and regulations about how off-street parking is to be provided in the neighborhood in terms of kind of design guidelines. So it's not specifically related to a permitting system for off-street parking, or excuse me, on-street parking.
Thank you for clarifying. I really appreciate it. We do have discussions in place just for the committee to understand. Parking has been overwhelming. I would say the last 2 years we've had FMW has built some private residential dormitories at the end of our street. Parking when we first moved in 10.5 years ago was very easy on Ash Avenue, Flint, in the park surrounding us. But right now it is almost impossible to find parking, especially when school is in session. So we as a neighborhood are starting to talk about the parking permit just to alleviate the parking pressure right now. But that is underway. A couple other things. I think Mark had mentioned that there's full support of the neighborhood for this project. I would probably disagree with this. I certainly, again, don't want to speak for my neighbors, but I know of at least 3 of my neighbors who oppose this. And I believe Alice and Mike are also tried to register, if not on right now, and I think they can speak as well. So I just wanted that clarified for the review committee. There are 20 houses on Ash Avenue. If you look at the border of the railroad tracks at the top of Ash all the way down to Hillsborough Street, there's 20 houses on our street. 8 of them are owner occupied, which is favorable for us. We really like seeing the neighborhood change to owner occupied housing. The rest are kind of I would say rental properties for people, either college students or people, young professionals and that nature. Of the 20, 19 have provided their own parking. And I think Mike, my neighbor who is also on, will speak to that as well. He is a landlord of 2 houses right across the street from us. And he has altered his property to allow for parking for his tenant. So 19 of the 20 provide parking. This is the only house on Ash Avenue that does not have parking on the property line. I would just say there's really just 2 concerns, and I would probably just halt at this point talking about the parking issue, because our main concern, because we are the house that's right next to Mark's that has only the 1.2 foot variance. So we are literally, I think, within 1.5 feet of Mark's house, and we're fine with the renovation going straight up. Our main concern is really just the water flow off of this new expanded roof line that he has. Right now, the dormers or the overlay of the roof, I don't know the exact dimensions. It's anywhere from 1 foot to 1.5 feet are currently overlaying onto our property line, and there's no gutters on this 2nd floor. So the water comes straight off of the roof line into the property between us, causing flooding issues for our house. Our concern, if in fact, the neighborhood forces Mark to provide parking in the back that's non-permeable, to allow for, his new tenants to have parking spaces. If it's non-permeable, if it's cement, there's going to be more water potentially coming down between the property lines, impacting both Mark's house and our house. So that's really our major concern. We've talked to Mark about this, and we think we have a pretty good solution. Is there a way that if a variance is granted on the parking side, that we can somehow put a condition in place to just ensure that gutters are put on this expansion that he is proposing? Is that okay? Is that done frequently, or?
The board can consider conditions when it's in the variance. I would ask that we discuss that with the zoning administrator in terms of whether or not that specifically can be a condition, but they can certainly consider conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. And then the last question I have is really just another neighbor who's an engineer had just questioned, the house was built, like Mark said, almost 100 years ago. It is our understanding that the expansion going up on the 2nd floor will probably introduce more weight to the foundation. Will the city inspect all, the foundation and the first floor as well as the second floor while it's being built and modified?
I would look to Mr. McDonald or Mr. Justin Remetta to see if they can answer that for you.
This is Keegan McDonald. Unfortunately, I'd have to defer. That is outside my area of expertise related to building inspections, but perhaps Justin or even Mr. Hodge could provide some feedback on that specific question.
Could we have the question repeated, please?
Yes, I would say that the house is built on piers the way we understand it. We've seen it too. We've been under the house ourselves. It's built on piers that, Mark had mentioned. It's about 100-year-old structure. If you build another 700 square feet or whatever it was up on top on the second floor, will the city inspectors inspect? Not obviously they're going to inspect the second floor, but would they inspect the first floor as well as the piers, the understructure under the house to make sure that it can support this additional weight?
I am no expert on the building code. Unfortunately, I would say that generally, building inspector will do an inspection when permits are issued. Again, I would think that structural soundness will be part of their inspection, but I can't speak to matters of the building code.
Thank you for clarifying. Appreciate it. That's it from our end, Ms. Richardson. I yield my time or the floor to Mike, my next door neighbor across the street.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Leeds?
Mr. Leeds, you said that you're in support of this, but you have concerns about parking. But then you were concerned if we required parking, there might be water issues. So I understand everything you said as legitimacy. I'm not questioning that. In terms of a preference, is there a preference in your perspective as to what might or might not be done regarding the parking?
Well, that's a very good question, and thank you for asking that, Mr. Swank. What I would say, my wife and I have an immediate concern over the parking because it's just very, very hard right now for us, the local residents, to find parking. However, we are working as a neighborhood to move towards what Keegan had mentioned earlier, a parking sticker for the local neighbors to use as a residential neighborhood going forward. We believe that once we get that in place, if it's approved, the parking situation will take care of itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Swank, the parking problem is caused by rental units at the corner of Ash Avenue in Hillsborough, and then also over by the Alexander YMCA. They put up these massive semi-private residential facilities for NC State students, and the parking is apparent that it's not enough to support the students there, so they're parking on the residential streets 1 to 2 to 3 blocks away from where they live.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you for allowing that.
Do any other board members have questions? Okay, Mr. Seagray, do you have any questions, Mr. Leeds?
No, we've spoken. I would point out, I think right now, because of the way the roof lines are, there's actually probably more water going towards this house. Once we put the new roof line on, it would go to the backyard and there would be gutters. That is something I do plan. And we've talked about this, that having the gutters. In fact, I've already done some mitigation for the water and now have a drain towards Flint. And we would tie the gutters into that drain so that I hope it would improve the water situation. It's clearly a concern of mine as well as Mr. Leeds. I would like to point out on the parking, there's not a tremendous amount I can do, because if I did put parking there, even if I managed to get 2 spots in there, I'd have to put a curb cut out and take away a spot. So,
right, Mr. Seagray, sorry, I'll give you a chance at the end to kind of go over the rebuttal.
to comment.
No, sorry. At the end, after we have the opposition,
Okay.
I'll give you a chance for rebuttal. In terms of the condition regarding the gutters, I know you said you had planned on it. Do you have any opposition if the board were to consider such a condition?
No, that's fine.
Okay. And would you have opposition to gutters being required for the entire roof line, or just for the area that is next to Mr. Leitz's?
Well, that's the thing. The roof there won't be any gutters on his side because the roof will point front and back, not towards him.
Okay.
I would mostly be causing my own problems if I didn't put the gutters in.
Understood. All right. Well, as I mentioned, we did have 2 persons signed up to speak in opposition. Let me see. I think we have Ms. Harvey actually back on the line. Laz, could you confirm that? Ms. Harvey, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. All right. So if you could please state your name and address, and Chairman Swink will swear you in.
All right. Alice Harvey, address 117 Ash Avenue.
Ms. Harvey, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Harvey, you may begin your presentation now. And as a reminder, any evidence and argument you present must focus on the applicable standards.
All right. I guess I am just adding to the parking problem, and in the sense that we can't even park in front of our house because there's just too many people trying to park on the street. And on that side, as you can see, there's actually no parking on the other side of the street. So it's just one side on Ash Avenue here. And so that takes out a bunch of spaces. So that really needs to be addressed because we have absolutely no additional parking available in this neighborhood. Other than that, my concern is just that it's getting very busy here. Besides the parking, there's the traffic. We can't get out of our driveway, and it's just getting overwhelming. I mean, that seems to be the biggest issue here. Of course, the floodplains and everything. It's not just a matter of draining the water towards the street, because the street floods as well. So we need to be concerned about that. But that's basically my whole statement.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. Does the board have any questions for Ms. Harvey? Okay. Does Mr. Seagray have any questions for Ms. Harvey?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say?
I said no.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we have Mr. Mike Iverson. Mr. Iverson, could you please state your name and address, and Mr. Swink will swear you in.
Iverson, 4304 Lynn Laurel Drive, Raleigh, 27612.
Mr. Iverson, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Iverson, you may begin your presentation. And again, as a reminder, any evidence and argument that you present must focus on the applicable standards.
And mine's just going to be an oral presentation. It's I'll try to keep it short. I am for the improvements that he wants to make to the property. I'm against the parking, and I have I own 2 properties right across the street from him at 123 Ash and 201 Ash. And recently we had one of the neighbors who had off-street parking, and they moved 2 of their cars to parked them in front of my 2 properties. And normally I don't hear anybody complain about parking because I do have off-street parking, but a lot of times the tenants like to, if they come home for lunch, it's easier to park in front of the house and jump out, eat lunch and jump back in rather than park behind the house and walk. So after those 2 cars, just 2 cars parked in front of my house for a week, I was getting complaints from all my tenants about the parking and what can we do about it. So it is tight. And that one example shows to me how tight it really is. And so I'm happy to have, on one hand, to have the improvements to the house, but adding additional parking doesn't make me happy and doesn't make my tenants happy. All right, that's all I got.
All right. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Iverson? Any questions? All right. Mr. Seagrave, do you have any questions for Mr. Iverson? Okay, Mr. Seagrave, we'll give you now a chance to respond to all the other testimony and presentations that you've just heard. So if you want to go ahead and discuss what you were mentioning about the parking earlier, you can do that now.
Sure. I think the only thing I need to address is the parking, because everybody else seems to be supportive of the rest of it. As far as the parking goes, I acknowledge that it's tight there. The cars do seem to not be from the neighborhood. I don't think that I have any way to affect the parking very much in a positive or negative way. In that, as Mr. Iverson said, I see cars coming apparently from other apartment buildings and kind of be parked there for many days in a row. And that's just what happens. In terms of my ability to add parking, as I said, I think if I may be able to add 1 or 2 spaces and take away a space when I put the cutout in, I just don't see that I'm going to be able to either positively or negatively affect the parking in the area until some other remedy, such as the permits, takes place. My understanding from, I think actually from Mr. Leitz, who talked earlier, is that before those buildings were built, parking was plentiful. So I think that's all I have, unless there's other questions.
Does the board have any questions?
I do. I'm trying to clarify the current condition. Does the current house provide 2 units or 3 units?
3 units. There's no change in the number of units.
And so, exactly. So there's no change in the number of units, and you're not providing parking at this time?
No, the house was never built with parking, and it's never.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the board? Okay, does staff have anything further?
Yes, I just want to add 2 points for clarification. The first being to Mr. Swink's question. He is correct, and of course Mr. Sager is correct too, that the current structure has 3 units and the proposed structure will still have 3 units. It is my understanding, however, that the upstairs unit, which is being renovated, currently just has 1 bedroom. After renovation, it will have 2 bedrooms, which does increase the amount of required parking by 1/2 space, which would effectively be 1 space when going towards compliance. The other point I just wanted to make, and this is just a housekeeping item, but an original copy of the agenda did cite the code section related to the side yard setback as 224B4. The correct citation and what's included in board docs in the report is 224B3. I just wanted to provide that for the record.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Does the board have any other questions based on that? All right, well, I will give it back to Mr. Swink for board deliberations and the vote.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Richardson. Entertain some discussion or a motion.
Yeah, I have some questions about issues because I think we need to discuss that. I know we've heard from other residents that when you have more development, they end up having parking issues. And I've moved recently, and I know I'm incurring some issues with parking, so I can understand that. But is there anything that we can add as a condition to help with this issue? And what is the process that they will need to go through to get the sticker parking? just for the residents, they can keep other people from parking directly around their property.
So I did actually close the evidentiary hearing, so I'll go ahead and ask Mr. McDonald if he can respond to Ms. Rudisill.
Sure. And I just will advise, I'm not an expert on the specific process, but I do have a little bit of experience. Essentially, there's a petition that's circulated amongst neighbors. It's evaluated by the Department of Transportation. They look at the specific scope. It does have to meet a specific size in terms of the number of adjoining block faces. And then also they conduct a parking study to see what the parking need and demand is in that specific area. And then after that point, I believe the department director reviews the application and then presents it to eventually the city council for their final approval. So it is somewhat of a lengthy process. I want to say there's maybe about 15 of these in the city, somewhere around that number. Most are adjoining commercial districts, major thoroughfares, or like the downtown area. So it's fairly common. I mean, some of you might live in one yourself, but in terms of the total timeline from effectuation, application to effectuation, I couldn't say, but there is a pretty detailed process laid out by the city to get this accomplished.
And is that process was there a comment that process had been started with this area?
I believe Mr. Leeds may have said that they were in the process of looking into it. If we could unmute Mr. Leeds, if he wants to speak further on that.
Yes, we have started. Thank you for the opportunity to revisit this. We have started the process. My wife has been working on it for maybe 3 or 4 months with the local neighbors and starting to get just feedback from us. And we are moving forward with the petition. We'll get that in place. And so hopefully the timeline doesn't take too long from start to finish, but we're underway right now.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds.
Absolutely.
Does anyone else have any questions? And Ms. Rudisill, did that answer all of your questions?
Yeah, all of them except whether the board should consider additional conditions. I guess if they have this process moving forward, that help with this issue. But I don't know if there's other conditions that we as a board should consider, or whether we view that as sufficient.
Okay, I'll deliberate about that. Is there any other questions for the applicant or any of the folks who were here to speak? Okay, I will now close the evidentiary hearing and give it back to Mr. Swink.
Thank you. Yeah, the parking is clearly a concern, and understandably in neighborhoods like this, there are tight parking situations. A balance to this conversation, though, is the stormwater side, and impervious surface increases the runoff. And I think that Mr. Leeds acknowledged that putting parking in the back has the potential, he didn't say it would, but has the potential to impact runoff to his property. So that would be something that would have to be addressed. And it would clearly create likely impervious surface. You can do pervious paving, but it's not foolproof. So I think that's something the board can legitimately consider. If there's a sense among the board that adding a parking space or two is a worthy goal, we can consider that. I'll certainly entertain more conversation about this.
Yeah, this is Steve Kinney. I have mixed thoughts about this. I understand that this one particular.
Mr. Kinney, can you talk really loud?
Can you all hear me now?
Barely.
Barely.
Do you have something covering your microphone, maybe?
What about now?
Just talk loudly and we'll do our best. It's important to hear you.
I was just saying that I have mixed thoughts about this. One or two parking spaces probably isn't going to have a big impact on this neighborhood. But at the same time, if the applicant is adding a resident to his building to obtain more rent, I do think he has a responsibility to provide parking. We ask the same of commercial developers. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Discussion ideas? I'll entertain motion. Mr. Koontz, you look like you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I think the linchpin here is like, if he does provide a parking space and he's really just doing it to dedicate himself, he's taking away another shed room for the community. Because, you got to allow access for a driveway, and could they put that close to the neighboring driveway? I don't know. There's a lot to think about here with regard to it. I think a lot of that parking issue comes up with the old PPOD district. I think that's what they used to call it when 1301 was built up the street. They didn't have to require any parking for, at least the commercial tenants back then. So I think some of that's what you're seeing here. Again, it's just some of the problems we're going to run into, as we've seen a lot last year, of a densifying, former town of Raleigh, which is now, a major metropolitan area. So we're going to see a lot of these, and I don't think we need to think about what we're setting as precedent here, because each district, each case is certainly different. Based on our meeting last week or last month, where I stand on parking. I think that's just part of the overall equation when you're densifying cities, is that we ultimately need to rely less on street parking and parking and the vehicle use. I think is really what you're coming into question in a densifying area, because there are a lot of residents on Hillsborough Street that are living there in other areas of the city that don't have a car. A lot of the student housings up there don't provide any of it, and they don't need it, and that's why they lease pretty well. So, my motion is going to be to approve with no conditions, but that's me.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I make a second on that.
Mr. Meyer, we have a motion and a second. I would make one observation as I look more closely at this aerial photo. There's on-street parking that if you put a driveway into the back, you'd lose a on-street parking space. So there might be a net gain of one, or it might zero out depending on how much parking you could get in the backyard. So again, it's a difficult situation. I'm glad to hear the neighborhood is working on a permit process that seems to be effective in other neighborhoods. I hope that's successful here. We have a motion and a second to approve. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Puccini, let's move to a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, sir. On the motion, Mr. Koontz?
Approve.
Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Swink?
Approve.
Ms. Rudisill?
Approve.
Mr. Sutton?
Approved.
Thank you. That makes 5 approvals.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's move to evidentiary hearing number 3. This is 1120 East Whitaker Mill Road, RIW Plan of Steel LP property owner. It's a variance BOA 0005-2020. We have 2 more staff signed up at this time that I will now swear in. Bradley Kimbrell, Transportation.
Here.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Justin Biegler, Project Advocacy.
I do.
Okay, hang on.
Oh.
No worries. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. We have participants. Matthew Carpenter's our attorney. I do not need to affirm your oath, but Natalie Carmen, please state your name and your address for the record.
Natalie Carmen.
And your
the business address is 223 Southwest Street, Suite 1100.
Okay, Ms. Carmen, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I affirm.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. One moment as I pull up the presentation. All right, so this is a variance to the cross-access requirements set forth in section 835 of the UDO. The subject property is highlighted in red here. I will kind of advance actually 2 slides because it makes a little bit more sense when you can see the property boundaries of the subject property and the neighboring property. So again, this is related to the cross-access requirements. Actually, the subject property, which is shown highlighted in yellow to the right in this image, is seeking relief for not having to provide cross-access to the property to the left. So the subject property sits at the terminus of Whitaker Mill Road, right before the railway line. The proposal specific to this property is for surface parking, but it is part of a larger development taking place to the north and east in this image. There is also a planned roadway extension of East Whitaker Mill Road, and I'll just show that real quick for you all. Here's from the site plan. So you can see that there are plans to kind of improve this transportation network over time. Essentially, the cross-access requirements state that an offer of cross-access needs to be provided between 2 properties that front along a non-local street. We do have staff from transportation here to answer any specific questions you may have related to traffic safety or intent, but I do hope to provide some additional context as well. One of the kind of unique things about this property is that the existing property boundary between the subject property and its neighbor is essentially a private driveway. So there is a strange kind of circulation and condition to the neighboring property. I will note that this offer of cross-access is something that would only be really brought to life should that neighboring property redevelop. And at that time, it would be assessed that the cross-access is safe for both the subject property and the neighboring property. So it wouldn't be really constructed until that adjoining property also redevelops. Here is just an image I think that the applicant provided just to show their parking area, which is on the left. The purple or blue pathway kind of shows a potential path for that cross-access. And they are just seeking again to not have to provide that offer and what would eventually be constructed should the neighboring property redevelop. I did just want to note one other comment. Transportation staff again is here to answer any specific questions, but the cross-access standards in this section of the UDO, which are also repeated in section 953 of the Raleigh Street Design Manual, are intended to facilitate adequate access management. The U.S. Federal Highway Administration describes access management as a set of techniques that state and local governments can use to control access to highways, major arterials, and other roadways. The benefits of access management include improved movement of traffic, reduced crashes, and fewer vehicle conflicts. Cross-access is required on non-local streets in order to reduce conflict points where there is typically greater annual average daily traffic values and higher speeds. One aspect of access management is to improve pedestrian mobility and safety by reducing crossings and conflict points. So that was just a comment provided by our transportation staff. They do not have anything further to add. That was just to give you some idea of the intent behind the regulation, but they are here to answer any questions. I did also just want to note that Mr. Beegler is available from our project advocacy group, just in case you have any process questions related to how these development approvals move forward. Staff from the zoning area does not have any other further questions. I am happy to try and answer any questions, and transportation staff is as well. If not, I can pass it off to the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McDonald. Board members, any questions? Okay, let us move on. The applicant can now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. And as I remind you, any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. And Mr. Carpenter, please affirm that your application exhibits will be admitted into the board record.
Thank you, Mr. Swink. Matthew Carpenter, attorney at Maddox Law Firm, here on behalf of the property owner and developer, RIW Plan of Steel. Natalie Carmen of Stewart, the civil engineer on the project, is also on the call with me. At this time, I'll move to have our exhibits and testimony admitted as part of the record. And as Keegan mentioned, the request here is for complete relief from the UDO requirement to provide an offer of cross access to adjacent properties. And as I've understood in the past, just to clarify one point, as part of our development approvals, we'd be required to provide the offer of cross access, which the adjacent property owner could accept at any time. I mean, and if that impression is wrong, then I'm sure staff can clarify, but I'll leave that for after my presentation. Can we move to Exhibit 1, Keegan? Thanks. So, as you can see, the subject property is a 1.24 acre parcel located at the end of East Whitaker Mill Road. And this parcel is part of the overall Raleigh Ironworks development, which is a multi-phase mixed-use project that will revitalize and reuse the historic Raleigh Ironworks site. And it actually includes all of the property kind of between the railroad there and Atlantic Avenue. And so for the subject parcel, there will be a parking lot or a deck which will serve the overall development. And the adjacent property to which the UDO requires an offer of cross access is currently an industrial and warehouse space. And as you can see here, they have direct access, directly onto East Whitaker Mill Road at that kind of awkward dead end. And can we go to Exhibit 2, Keegan? And also, as Keegan mentioned, the Raleigh Street Plan contemplates the extension of East Whitaker Mill Road to the east. And as you can see, that dashed purple line represents where the new portion of East Whitaker Mill Road will be located. And that'll be completed through different phases of the Raleigh Ironworks project. And so kind of moving on to the variance standards, first, unnecessary hardship will result from the strict application of the cross access requirement. Strict application of the requirement here would create an unsafe condition in the proposed parking lot. As I mentioned, the adjacent site is currently used as a warehouse, and the goal of Raleigh Ironworks is to create a walkable, pedestrian-friendly, mixed-use community, which is not necessarily compatible with an existing industrial warehouse use. And so allowing employees, delivery trucks, and visitors of the adjacent warehouse to cut through the proposed parking lot would create a dangerous situation where you have vehicles pulling in and out and leaving Raleigh Ironworks while delivery trucks are cutting through the parking lot to get to East Whitaker Mill Road. And so, further, can I go to slide Exhibit 3, Keegan? Thanks. As you can see here, the proposed cross access, wouldn't improve access for the adjacent property at all, really. They already have direct access onto East Whitaker Mill Road, and it would really be putting them out, maybe approximately 200 feet south of where their access drive is. And so second, the hardships here result from conditions that are peculiar to the property. First, we have this really awkward dead end at East Whitaker Mill Road, which is almost like a cul-de-sac right now. And as I mentioned, that will be improved by the extension of East Whitaker Mill Road. And we also have an extremely irregular lot shape, which contributes to this. And the lot also backs up directly to the railroad. And so, you know, you can contrast this to a situation where cross access would improve access. Say if there was an additional road where the railroad is located, then, you know, cross access would allow the adjacent property to access that road through our site, but that's not the case. It would just be another access point on East Whitaker Mill Road. Also, the hardships did not result from actions of the owner. The current road configuration and the use of the adjacent property existed when the current owner purchased the property. And finally, the request is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. The goal of the cross-access requirement is to create efficient pedestrian and vehicular access between lots and to and from public rights-of-way. And here, you know, as I mentioned already, the required cross-access wouldn't improve access, but could create a potentially dangerous situation in the parking lot. And relief from the requirement will allow safe access management, as transportation staff mentioned, which can reduce potential conflict points by, you know, they're at the northern portion of the proposed parking lot, as you can see here. We would put up some landscaping or, you know, maybe a small wall or fence that would prohibit, you know, people from the adjacent site from cutting through the parking lot. And so we think that would really help traffic circulation here, together with the extension of East Whitaker Mill Road. So can I go to Exhibit 6, Keegan? A couple more. So, there you go. So I wanted to show you all this just to get an idea of what the final project might look like. As you can see at the bottom of this graphic, that would be the new portion of East Whitaker Mill that would wrap around the project. And the site the subject site for this variance is actually at the bottom left of the screen, and it's shown here as wooded, but it is planned to be a parking lot. And so to conclude, the variance is necessary due to the irregular lot shape and the awkward road configuration, and the traffic and existing industrial warehouse uses of the adjacent property are incompatible with the proposed walkable mixed-use Raleigh Ironworks community. And relief from the cross-access requirement will allow better and safer access management. And so that's all I've got, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Do you have any questions for Mr. Carpenter or Ms. Carmen? Nope. Okay, we had no additional participants to sign up to speak either in support or in opposition. So we'll move to closing statements. Mr. Carpenter, you just summed up, but is there anything you would add?
No, sir.
Likewise, Mr. McDonald, anything else you would offer?
Nothing at this time.
Then let's close the evidentiary hearing and move to the board deliberation. I'll entertain some discussion or a motion.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve, because I think this particular project came before us about a year or so ago for another approval, and it seemed to be in good standing from everything I've seen thus far.
Thank you, Mr. Bottom. Ms. Rudisill, we have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? And then Mr. Puccini, if you'll take us to a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, sir. On the motion, Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisill.
Approve.
Thank you, Chairman Swink.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Koontz.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Approved.
Thank you. That makes 5.
Thank you very much. Let us move along to evidentiary hearing number 4, 1709 Center Road, Thomas H. and Cynthia K. McCullough, property owners. This is a variance, BOA 0002-2020. First, let me get to the staff. Mr. Hodge, welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Hodge is the planning staff case presenter. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, or nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Also, Martha Lobo, Planning and Development. Ms. Lobo, are you here?
Yes, sir.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Jason Ruff, also Planning and Development.
Yes, sir. Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. As for our participants, Jonathan Anderson will be the case attorney. We have Hank McCullough as the applicant. Mr. McCullough, if you would state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Hank McCullough. My address is 1709 Center Road, Raleigh.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hodge, welcome.
Thank you. BOA 0002-2021. The applicant, Thomas H. and Cynthia K. McCullough, property owners, are requesting a 2.85-foot variance from the Unified Development Ordinance Section 2.2.7.d.1 in order to permit a detached house with a sidewall height of 27.85 feet that has a 5-foot side yard setback on a 0.16 acre property, zoned residential 10 and located at 1709 Center Road. So the property is in an R10 neighborhood. Here's an aerial when the home was under construction. The home has actually been constructed. The ordinance up until January of this year allowed for a 22-foot wall height at the minimum district yard setback, which in this case is a 5-foot minimum setback. However, as of January 1st, the code changed and permitted a 25-foot sidewall height at the minimum setback. What we have here is a sidewall height that's 2.85 feet too tall. There appears to have been some permitting oversights associated with this case, which is why we have Mrs. Lobo and Mr. Ruff on the call if you have any questions. But apparently in the final stamping of the approved sets, an earlier version of the project, which was known to violate sidewall height, was actually stamped as the approved plan set. And the applicant appears to have built off of those earlier versions of the plan set. And at time of field inspection, the field inspector noticed the discrepancy. And so that's how this case ended up at the Board of Adjustment. So here's the plot plan showing the home. It's on the left side of the house. When you're viewing this image, is where the issue lies. It's actually the south-facing side of the home. Again, the sidewall height there is just shy of 3 feet too tall per the new allowances of our infill sidewall height regulations. Here's an image showing the approved stamp. These are the front and rear elevations. But this top image is the one that's in question where it is too tall, particularly the portion where there's this rear two-story component with the smaller transom windows in that portion of the structure, as well as the back. As you can see, the property drops away from the street along as it goes to the rear, and therefore there's a taller foundation and basement wall at that portion of the site, which is contributing to the additional height. If the roof line were consistent with that midsection portion of this south-facing wall, I don't think there would be any issue. But again, this was discovered late in construction when it already was under roof and all of the framing and structural elements were in place. That concludes my presentation. Happy to pass it off to any other staffers who wish to provide any additional comment. Otherwise, we could turn it over to the applicants unless the board has questions of staff at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Are there any other planning staff have anything you wish to add? Okay, hearing none.
I just would note that the city does not oppose this request.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that clarification. Board members, any questions for the staff?
So is this, John Kuntz here. So this is vertical. This is closed in, roofs on top?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other board questions? Okay, let's move along to the applicant. You'll have your chance now to present your information. And Mr. Anderson, again, I would ask that you have your exhibits and application officially submitted into the record. If you would state that request, please.
Thank you, Mr. Swink. This is Jonathan Anderson here on behalf of Thomas H. McCullough and his wife, Cynthia K. McCullough. For the sake of the record, Thomas is Hank McCullough. That's what he goes by. And I'm Jonathan Anderson, the attorney. We would move to admit the testimony and exhibits that are going to be heard today into the record.
Thank you.
As Mr. Kuntz asked, this is a completed new construction single-family residence that was built off of city-approved stamped plans. It just happened that those plans that were an earlier version that violated the setback lines with regard to the side wall height. So unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance because there is an existing structure that would have to be removed or remodeled in an unduly burdensome way. That hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, in that there's an existing structure, the single family home that's already been completed, and removing that would result in undue burden on the homeowner. The next point is that the hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. And that's accurate in that the property owner built the plans off of what he understood had been the city approved stamped plans. The requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent in that this is a relatively minor setback violation. And there, I understand there is not a neighbor opposition. In addition, the window on the there is a 12-foot transom window on the property, but it is set at 8 feet off the finished floor, so no privacy is compromised. That would be our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions that the board has.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Board members, any questions? Okay, we have no one who has signed up to speak either in support or in opposition to this. So move to our closing statements if any are needed. Board members had no questions. Mr. Anderson, you just wrapped up your presentation, but is there anything further you would add?
Nothing further, Mr. Swing.
Thank you. Mr. Hodge, anything further from you?
No, sir.
Then let's close the evidentiary hearing and move to the board for our discussion or a motion.
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Kuntz. We have a motion to approve. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Ruder. So we have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Puccini, a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. On the motion, Mr. Kuntz?
Approve.
Ms. Rittisell?
Approved.
Mr. Swank?
Approve.
Mr. Sutton?
Approved.
And Mr. Miles?
Approved.
Thank you. That makes 5.
Thank you, and thank you, staff, for being available today. Okay, let us move now to our fifth evidentiary hearing, and Ms. Richardson will conduct this hearing today.
Thank you, Chairman Swink. The property address for this case is 5825 North Hills Drive. The property owner is North Hills Investment Partners LLC, and this is for variance number BOA-0006-2021. Michael Birch will be representing the applicant. There are 3 others signed up to speak for the applicant and 1 additional person signed up to speak in opposition of this case. We'll swear everyone in prior to their opportunity to speak. And now we will start with staff's presentation, and Eric Hodge is the staff presenter for this case.
North Hills Investment Partners, LLC, property owner requests complete relief from UDO section 3.2.4.f.1, which requires that the ground floor elevation of apartment buildings in the residential mixed-use zoning district be at least 2 feet above the average curb level of the adjoining street in order to construct an apartment building, specifically Building 2, as shown on the site plan ASR-50-20, that has a ground floor elevation below the average curb level of North Hills Drive, which would be located on a 5.52 acre property, zone residential mixed use 4, parking limited, conditional use, located at 5825 North Hills Drive. There are actually other parcels associated with this development plan, but the specific building that's under discussion is located on the main tract at 5825 North Hills Drive. The additional tracts associated with the overall development plan include 714, 716, and 724 West Millbrook Road. To the west of the subject property is Shelley Lake Park. This property lies just north of Millbrook Road and is on the west side of North Hills Drive. Here's an aerial showing the site. Subject zoning case from last year. And here's the proposed site plan. So the building in question is at the top of the screen, that sort of backwards L shape configuration here. Is under the finished floor elevation as proposed is not 2 feet above the average curb level of North Hills Drive. The board sees lots of requests of this nature, particularly for sites that have a lot of topo as it relates to the site's elevation as compared to the nearby adjacent streets. We've seen lots of these, and as such, the city staff has been working on a text change that would actually remove this requirement in the future unless there is a frontage associated with the property that otherwise carries this requirement for finished floor elevations. This is the portion of the property showing where the topo drops off as you go away from North Hills Drive, and the property, this is the portion of the site where they're seeking relief from that code requirement. This is the east elevation as shown facing North Hills Drive. And so that is what's under discussion today. Again, staff is working on a text change to remove this requirement as applicable to the apartment building type on its own, absent any other triggers from a zoning frontage that would otherwise require the 2-foot finished floor elevation or higher. And as such, staff does not oppose this application today. Happy to answer any of the questions that you may have at this time, or if we have none, we can turn it over to the applicants to go through their presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hutch. Does the board have any questions? Okay. As I said, we have Michael Birch here to present evidence and legal arguments in support of the applicant's request. As a reminder, any evidence and argument must focus on the applicable standards. And we will start with swearing in those witnesses that are here to speak for applicant's case. So when I call your name, please say your address and Chairman Swink will swear you in. Joseph Lassiter.
Yes, I'm here.
Can you please state your name and your address?
Joseph Lassiter, 7305 Spyglass Way, Raleigh, 27615.
Mr. Lassiter, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, Ben Williams,
Yes, I'm here.
can you please state your name and address?
Yeah, Ben Williams, 3803B Computer Drive, Suite 104. It's in Raleigh, North Carolina, 27609.
Mr. Williams, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
And Tommy Craven.
Yes, this is Tommy Craven. My office address is 3803B Computer Drive, Suite 104. It's in Raleigh, and the zip is 27609.
Mr. Craven, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Birch, you can go ahead and proceed with your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much. Again, Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant. As you heard, Mr. Joe Lassiter, owner of the property, North Hills Investment Partners, is on with us, as well as Tommy Craven and Ben Williams, both professional engineers with Priest Craven and Associates, who have prepared the site plan that is subject of this variance request. Before getting into our presentation, I would ask that our application, our presentation, staff's presentation, as well as our site plan be introduced into the record as evidence.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So again, appreciate Mr. Hodges' staff report. He covered kind of the nature of our request very well. Wanted to provide a little background. If you could go to the next slide, please. These properties were recently rezoned to permit the proposed residential condominium development. There was much discussion during the rezoning process. It lasted for about a year that focused on the height of the buildings. There was a strong community desire that the buildings be only kind of 3 stories. And so we added a condition that limited the number of habitable stories to 3 stories. That was particularly as viewed from North Hills Drive, again, to kind of limit the height as compared to those townhomes across North Hills Drive that you see off Mill Greens Court, as well as relative to the townhomes to the north. But also, it was important to limit height for the community so that the buildings would not be as visible from Shelley Lake. This property does sit well above Shelley Lake. And so again, that is why we've added these conditions, which really don't affect the request, but I just wanted to give the board a sense of kind of the desire of the community, as well as the applicant, to limit height and mitigate height as much as possible. Without this variance, the applicant would be required to raise the entire building over 5 feet. And we'll get into some other kind of implications as well. But the unnecessary hardship is caused by the topography of the site, kind of east to west sloping towards Shelley Lake, and due to the established elevation of North Hills Drive. So you could go to the next slide, please. So the average grade along North Hills Drive is just about, call it 325 above sea level, but it actually, if you could maybe go to one more slide, it's I believe a little bit, easier to read there. But it actually kind of, this is a segment of North Hills Drive that's kind of going downhill and then at the northernmost point starting to come back uphill, which causes some hardship as well. The property falls over 15 feet in less than 30 feet from the property line. Actually, falls 25 feet within the first 100 feet and about 35 feet within the first 180 feet. So it is a pretty sharp fall off of North Hills Drive. Also want to note that there's a Duke Energy power line that was proposed to be relocated along North Hills Drive that kind of pushes the building back off the street, kind of down into the hole, as well as an additional 5 feet of right-of-way dedication required by the code. If you go to the next slide. Again, this shows kind of the overall site plan. We're focused on that building on the north side. If you can go to the next slide. That's just a zoomed in, and then one more. Again, that kind of shows just the fall almost, again, over 25 feet or so plus as you go across the full building. And then one more slide, and this will show the frontage of the building there. And so again, to comply, the floor, finished floor elevation would have to be raised at least 5 additional feet. What this would mean is that the building itself would be much higher and more imposing along North Hills Drive. The building would be much more visible from Shelley Lake. Because of the, this is already an import site, meaning a fill is already having to be brought in. Much more import fill would be required. The retaining wall on the west end of the site, closest to Shelley Lake, would increase by an additional 6 feet in height. So it would be kind of even more stark and visible from Shelley Lake. And more extensive grading would be required to maintain slopes, et cetera. And that would likely impact the tree safe area proposed closest to Shelley Lake. Again, all kind of negative impacts that would occur without the variance. So again, we've kind of referenced the unnecessary hardship in the form of a much taller building, much more extensive grading, more imported fill, and certainly much more kind of costly. All of this results from the topography of the site relative to North Hills Drive, which is our primary street. These are not, hardships are not a result of any actions of the owner. And the request is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, ensures public safety is secured, substantial justice is done. Again, the board has seen a number of these requests, and no one's really been able to articulate an intent of this ordinance. Sometimes stormwater is raised, but I would just note that we are complying with stormwater regulations through the use of an underground detention system. Second, approval of the variance would be consistent with the board's decisions in similar situations like BOA-46-2020, BOA-18-2020, and BOA-5219. All of these ground floor elevation cases resulting from grade relative to the primary street. Third, as Mr. Hodge mentioned, council has authorized text change TC-1919, which does eliminate this 2 foot above ground floor elevation. So eliminate the need for this variance altogether. And then fourth, granting the variance is consistent with the goal of the zoning conditions and the desire of council and the community for limiting height along North Hills Drive and to limit height and visibility from Shelley Lake. So from a fact testimony standpoint, I wanted to kind of get all of that in there. We, as I mentioned, we do have the professional engineers, Ben Williams, Tommy Craven, on that can answer questions, as well as Mr. Lassiter, the developer. Before kind of turning it back over, I do understand that Ms. Labiche has signed up to speak in opposition, but my hope and my understanding, based on a review of her materials, is that our interests are actually aligned, and that's to lower height and to mitigate view of the building from North Hills Drive and Shelley Lake. But if I'm incorrect, then I would ask the chair for the opportunity to object, standing, to testimony, to cross-examine at the appropriate time. So with that, we'll close our presentation, and again, we're available for any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Birch? Okay. As I mentioned, there is one person signed up in opposition of this case, and that is Ms. Teresa Labiche. And should you have any questions, Ms. Labiche, for Mr. Birch, you can go ahead and ask those during your presentation. If you could please state your name and address, and we'll have Chairman Swink swear you in before you begin.
Okay. Yes, my name is Teresa Labiche. I reside at 5889 North Hills Drive, Raleigh, North Carolina, 27609.
Oh, Mr. Swink, you're on mute.
Almost made it through the whole meeting without doing that. Hey, Ms. Labiche, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll provide will be the truth, the whole truth, or nothing but the truth? Let me repeat that. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Can
Thank
you
you.
not hear me? You can
I
hear
did
me?
not the first time, but thank you.
Oh, do I need to be closer?
You're fine now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Labiche, you may begin your presentation now. And just as a reminder, any evidence and argument you present must focus on the applicable standards.
Yes, and I will do my best. This is my first time doing this.
Got it.
So thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to offer points for consideration on behalf of myself and points that are shared by a number of neighbors and citizens that oppose the granting of this variance, and they were unable to speak at this time. Before I begin, I wanted to assure you it's my intention that the information I share does have bearing on this variance request. And we do believe a little bit of history regarding the site is beneficial to understanding our opposition. I'd like to speak in opposition to the variance request by addressing standards 1 and 2. Now, my first slide comes from a screenshot, and it's an excerpt from a February 2014 legal summary by UNC School of Government's Gladys Hall Coates Professor of Public Law and Government, David Owens. It's titled Background Materials for Board of Adjustment. And under the summary heading of the main resource page for this document, it's titled Background Material for Board of Adjustment Workshops. So reading this information, I learned that the standards for obtaining a variance are very strict, and that your job and the Board of Adjustment, this is one of your most powerful tools. So under standards on this page, it's noted that the variance may be granted only if all the standards of the general standards are met. So I've highlighted 2 bullet points in yellow that I'd like to address with regards to the variant request. These bullet points are listed on the City of Raleigh's application as standards 1 and 2. So as Mr. Owen writes, the applicant must show that strict application of the rules would create unnecessary hardships, and then goes on, state laws provide several tests regarding unnecessary hardships. So bullet 1 has within it, the hardship must be real and substantial. And he continues that mere inconvenience or additional expense is not adequate. So looking at the applicant's response to this standard 1 on its application, the unnecessary hardship would result from strict application of the ordinance by requiring significant grading throughout the site and the import of fill dirt. The amount of grading necessary to make the minimum ground floor elevation of building 2 feet above the curb level along North Hills Drive would be cost prohibitive and make the project economically infeasible. The inconvenience and additional expense of having to significantly grade and import fill in order to comply with the ordinance cannot be used to satisfy standard 1. So the development of this site has always been about the money, simple economics. Now, based on the site's topography, the existing sewer easement, the overhead power line that cuts through the interior of the property north to south that needs to be relocated, and the other ordinance restrictions, the developer must spend a lot of money to make a lot of money. Approval of the variance allows him to build at a density of 97 units. Excuse me? Density at 17 plus acres, 17 plus an acre is excessive for the site, size of the site. The actual rezoning case file for Z4119 included more acreage and a condition capping the density at 15 an acre. And there was an image that you showed, and you actually marked, one of the images that was shown, it might have been by Mr. Hodge, marked 910 West Millbrook, and it's not part of ASR 50-2020. So we actually have less acreage in the ASR in this site, but we're applying what was allowed with 15 an acre from additional acreage being added to the zoning request. So right before the city council voted in a special session, and this happened after the public hearing, after 24 hours comments closed, the condition 1 got changed from 15 an acre to a maximum of 112 units. Now this revision matters because of what I just stated. Now, while it's been noted in staff comments included in the ASR plan sets that they don't have to worry about writing anything about density because of the building type now, the 17 plus an acre is well above the city's 2030 comprehensive plan's recommended maximum number of dwellings per acre in a moderate density zoning classification. You know, RX is the range is 6 to 14. So a reduction in the scope of this project would make the site more consistent with the future land use map and the recommendations and key policies of the 2030 comprehensive plan regarding the density and its goal to ensure that the development complements the aesthetics and the unique sense of place, the character of the established neighborhoods surrounding Shelley Lake Park and along North Hills Drive. And I do want to add, it wasn't a unanimous planning commission vote. We had 2 people that opposed the recommendation to city council, and we had 1 person, I believe, Mr. Cox, who voted against it within the city council. And it was about the density, and it was about what was trying to be done so close to the park. So I wanted to just, I'm going to move on to my second bullet, and then I'll get into some slides. Bullet 2 presents a second test to determine unnecessary hardship. And this one talks about the hardship must be peculiar to the property, such as property location, size, or topography, and that conditions common to the neighborhood or the public are not sufficient. And this is the application, on the application for the city, this is standard 2, and it's worded on our application that conditions common to the neighborhood or the general public may not be the basis for granting a variance. So the marked properties on the following slides taken from Wake County IMAPs, imagery, and data show that sloped and significantly sloped properties are common to our North Hills area, appropriately named for this feature. After all, the site is located on North Hills Drive. And the properties I've included are developed properties that have a similar slope with 100 feet, like the area identified in the applicant, by the applicant on the subject site. And these properties demonstrate successful low density builds that allow topography to dictate how the land would be developed, and the dwellings complement the existing character of the area. Now, I've also included a few properties that actually go in a different direction. They get taller at a significant rate within the first 100 feet. So if we could go to slide, it looks like, I want to go to slide 3 if I may. So that'll be the one that's got some typing on it, and it's got the zoning around. Mr. Hodge, I don't know if you'll advance.
I'm here. It's
Oh, it's fine. Is it freezing?
Yeah, give me a moment.
I was going to say, I am graphic laden, I'm sure. Thank you so much. Okay, skip that one. That was the zoning that's having to be met with the ASRs. Yeah, on this one, this just shows you something that we showed throughout this whole process. What's happening right now around the lake, what's happening along North Hills Drive. And I know you can't see it, and when we get in closer in the next slide, I'll be able to point it out. But just looking at this one, you'll see that we're predominantly low density. We've got some lower, I want to say, 2-story, 2.5 with the pitch roofs dwellings. These are townhomes. These are apartments way over on the, the west side of the lake. You know, you've got the apartments there. But this lake, this whole area is surrounded predominantly by actually R4, and then you get a sprinkling of R6s, and then way up there you've got some R10. This is way off the northern head of even the whole system of the lake, and you can't even see but like 4 of those buildings through the trees and things. So they're super well masked, and they're not anywhere near the lake area. If we can go to the next slide. So this next slide kind of comes in a little bit tighter on the area, and I wished I had put little dots on things. Not that one. Wait, is that it? It just got smaller? Wait, go back. There we go. Okay. On here, I wish I could point it out. If I had marked where the property is, and I hope y'all can remember where that was. There are 3 little houses there. There's that little green patch off of Shelley Lake, and then right to the east of it, and then right above it, and then catty corner from it. Those are owned by a family that's been there for now 4th generation. They've been there since, gosh, Snelling and divided the land up, and they are some of the original people. So they've been there a long time. They also own that little corner piece of property that doesn't belong to the subject site and causes the subject site to have that little funky northern border. And this family is going to be greatly impacted by whatever's built there. And so that's of great concern. So to have something RX and really big is, even with your zone A's, your B's, and your C's, it's going to impact their lives, a life that hasn't been impacted for many years. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is sort of my overview. I noticed that a lot of times we tend to focus just right there north of the subject site at those townhomes, and across the street at those townhomes. There's a lot more happening here. If you go just a little bit more to your north, you hit my area. You know, I'm not that far from the subject site. I walk down there all the time with my dogs. And right below that big block where it looks like a state on a map, that is the lower portion of what's happening with the townhomes. And so smitten, dabbled all around there with addresses and things. These are properties that have similar slope issues and things. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So coming in on this one, you can see where those are located in that northern section. We can go to the next slide if we're not going too quick for y'all. Okay, and so this is a zoom in on that section, and because of the same conditions that they are having on the site property, below this property, they've got a cut through. It's a real mess. Right above it, right outside, you'll notice there's some yards that are coming down, touching on the east boundary. Just all along that east boundary, all of that is severely sloped. You couldn't build on it without a lot of finance coming into that area and things, and the water's cutting through. It's very similar. That's not as deep, but where that little point is at the end, that has, there's another slope thing, and it does exactly what the subject site's doing. And they have that similar 100 feet and have that severe drop. There's another property underneath where it says viewing Eric Hodges screen. That property is a personal property right at one of the little cul-de-sacs in my neighborhood. And theirs severely drops and goes into Shelley Lake's Greenway area as well. And there are actually two properties back there. Let's go to the next slide and you can see it a little bit better. So these two properties are at the end of a cul-de-sac in my neighborhood. And they're dealing with the same issues. And again, people are, I guess back in the day, and even today, they're letting the topography dictate more of what they'll put there, so it's more in harmony with the surroundings and stuff, more site specific. Let's go to the next slide and we'll go across. This is over on the other side where we have more greenway. Lucky us. And they too have similar issues. Okay, and next slide. Okay, so now we go to the southern portion from the site, and the ones over there in the interior, 1061, 1041, 1021, and 1001 Wimbledon Drive. Those are great examples of where, again, our typography goes up and down and steeply in places. And that's where people, it went from a low to a high really, really fast. And then as you come down North Hills Drive, you've got houses that are nestled down into with a drive coming in, dealing with the topography at 5508. And the other numbers, 5400, 5406, and 5216 all have, again, those steep drops, and they've handled it. I know this was before probably the UDO code and things, but I think for me, it's about how much do you put on there, you know, and do you work with what you got, or do you try to totally artificially manipulate it to the point to where we lose things? So I'll go to the next slide. And this is just, and these are just zoom ins. Keep going, Mr. Hodge, that's fine. So that just gives you some topo. Okay, and those were those other properties. Go ahead. Okay, and I think that's it. So as you can see, the topography of the applicant's site is common to this area. Therefore, the applicant has failed again to demonstrate an unnecessary hardship. And one final point, the ultimate height of Building 2 cannot be any taller than already allowed because it's restricted by the neighborhood transition yard. The maximum height of Building 2, as seen from North Hills Drive, has been consistently communicated by the applicant. We can go back to the CAC vote on December 16, 2019. And I believe it was one of the engineers was talking and says, you know, hey, yeah, it's going to be below ground. And as the first level of the habitable space of the 4 stories, it would be somewhere somewhat elevated above North Hills Drive by a couple of feet. So if you didn't grant the variance, the maximum height of this building is going to be set at 3 stories due to the conditions within the 7 Z4119 conditions, where we've got, you know, number 4, max 3 stories habitable space, you know, no building can have any more than that. And then number 5 would just kind of be a moot point because they're not allowed to build 4 unless they can go below the average grade. So that wouldn't even be something to consider. So without the variance or with the variance, we're going to end up with 3 stories. And so I don't see that that is really, when we cite, you know, oh, this is a big benefit, it really, to me, is a moot point. You know, both ways, they're going to comply with the city stormwater regulations and any other ordinances. You know, denying the variance allows the applicant to revisit and redefine the design problems presented by the properties, to reduce the overall density to a level that is within the recommended range for RX of this type, and make it more consistent with the flume and the recommendations and key policies of the 2030 comprehensive plan, you know, regarding density and its goal to ensure the development complements the character of the established neighborhoods. None of us think that it can't be developed. None of us thinks that it would, that we were going to have trees forever. But we would, and we tried, and we had hoped that the consideration would be to the level of density, not only for
Ms.
us.
Ms. Labiche, I apologize for interrupting you.
I like choppy.
No. I just need you to stay on the applicable standards for this.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Then I guess, in our view, thank you so much. I appreciate that. In our view, that denying the variance allows substantial justice to be achieved. And I move to have my presentation be admitted into the record. And thank you, Ms. Richardson.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions for Ms. Labiche? Okay, and I will ask if Mr. Birch has any questions for Ms. Labiche, or you know, has anything further that he wants to present.
Great, thank you. Again, Michael Birch. I don't believe I have any questions for Ms. Labiche, but I did just want to make a few notes for the record.
Understood.
So first, just wanted to object to both standing to participate as a party for lack of special damages, as well as object to testimony that doesn't meet, you know, it's not competent material, substantial evidence that's relevant to this parcel and this request. And then also wanted to make a few notes just to kind of clarify the record that that just to make sure we're all on the same page that this rezoning process went the right way. So just the conditions were submitted, you know, in compliance with the 10-day rule, and the density max is 112 units. It did include additional property, but as you heard, we're at 97 units on a portion of the property, which does leave some density for the other parcel. Do want to note that the power line relocation is being undertaken by Duke Energy. That's something that they were pursuing kind of independent. This project, it affects property very much north and south of us. And I just wanted to note that the whole basis for this request is to allow the development to work with the topography, not against it. And that denial of the variance would actually require even more grading and disruption, and actually is counter fights against the existing topography. And so would also just note that in relationship to a lot of the properties shown in Ms. Labiche's presentation, that pretty much all of those sit below grade, and would note that they would not comply with this regulation. And obviously all of them were developed prior to and did not have to comply with the 2 feet above average grade. So I did just want to kind of make all of those notes for the record, but again, would encourage board to approve the variance given the unnecessary hardship caused by the topography of the site, so that we can be consistent with the purpose, spirit, and intent of the ordinance to limit impact on adjoining properties with regard to height, because the building would have to be much higher than we are asked, would like for it to be. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Does the board have any questions?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Hodge. As you've noted, we have seen several cases recently about this 2-foot variance, and you indicate the text change is underway. Could you say once again, what's the status of that text change? How close is that to being in place, or do you know?
We anticipate it going to the Planning Commission, I believe within the next month or so.
So if I understand, if that text change were to be in place today, this would not be a question before us. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Richardson, you're.
Thank you. Yes, no. Does the board have any further questions? Okay. And Mr. Birch, do you have anything further?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks. And staff, do you have anything further?
No additional comment.
Okay. With that, I will close the evidentiary hearing and give it back to Mr. Swink for board deliberations and the vote.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, you've heard our case today. We have before us discussion or motion would be entertained.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. We have a motion to approve and a second. Is there any further discussion? Then, Mr. Puccini, let's go to a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, sir. On the motion, Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Mr. Mile?
Approve.
Chairman Swink?
Approve.
Mr. Sutton?
Yes, approved.
Ms. Rudisil?
Approve.
Thank you. That makes 5.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let us now move to our approval of the minutes from our February 8th, 2021 meeting.
I've got one. These are great notes, number one. I do want to say that. I think these notes are always fantastic, and they're far more detailed that I can never put in something if I were doing the same thing. So I do want that to be on record. But two, on page 12, under board deliberations, second paragraph, it says, with Mr. Coons noting parking is a concern for him, and talk about his pet peeve and how change of use impacts parking. That's kind of right, but what I was really getting at is I'm concerned at how adaptive reuse is limited by the parking requirements and thresholds associated with the change of use, if that makes sense. There's a slight difference.
The problem is intent. I can only write down what was said. I cannot interpret what the intent was.
Okay, well, can we add intent?
Not now, unless you want to amend the minutes.
Well, what I'm getting at is, when you say talked about his pet peeve of change, like I'm sure I didn't just say that and leave it there. I know I added more into the intentionality of what was behind that.
Again,
when I read it, it makes me saying that that I have a concern with parking down there. And I don't have a concern with parking. I have a concern with the adaptive reuse, with which I know I said, and I'm not getting to you. I know what I said, and this is partially true in the way I read it. It makes me think that I'm siding with, not that I'm siding, but it makes me, when I read this, on the surface, it sounds like that I was just concerned about the parking, and I'm not really concerned about the parking down there because I made a motion to not be concerned with the parking.
Well, like I said, one can interpret what was said if you go back, because this meeting is video, and you could see the whole thing word for word. I could do a verbatim of what I go back and do a verbatim and resubmit the minutes at a later time, but that would also delay the approval of the findings of fact and conclusions.
Then what do we do? Like, right? Because the way this is worded, I mean, the words you chosen are probably largely accurate, but I think a lot's missing there. And, I'm careful about what I say. And I know that my point in all my comments last month was to talk about the adaptive reuse, which is the pet peeve. The parking is not the pet peeve.
I can only we'll go by what was said, but I cannot write down intent.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm suggesting that you rewrite it and to talk about the adaptive reuse, which is what I opined for 5 minutes on last month.
Again, summary.
Okay, so then let's propose a change, and we'll take that route.
All right then. So how would you like it to read? I'll give you an option. You have two options.
Yeah.
You could move to adopt, but with the amendment saying that this, or you could ask that the minutes be rewritten, your section be rewritten.
Which could be handled more quickly?
You can move to adopt with the following amendment, with the statement that you state what your intent was, but that will not, it would be part of your motion, but not necessarily part of the overall minutes that were approved. Does that make sense?
Right. So we can basically make a motion to approve contingent upon this amendment. That's essentially what we're doing, correct? Ms. Richardson, I need help here.
Yeah, not a problem. So if you do it in a way you want an amendment, that will be, then we'll have to, I believe we would have to delay approving the minutes until next month once Mr. Puccini can rework them per your request. As he said, you could also move to approve them with the understanding that by what you said for that particular hearing, and be as specific as you can, that you were referring to the adaptive reuse parking rather than just the general being not in favor of the parking.
So which is what I don't want to do is delay it, but I, what would you suggest to be a more efficient or quick approval? The latter of which?
Yes, I believe the latter would allow for the minutes to be approved now and the decisions or the findings of fact and conclusions of what it be.
Okay. Well, let's do that. So what do we need to do to do that? And again, I preface it all with I appreciate the words there, but I want to make sure that my point was noted because this stuff is lasting. I'm not concerned with the park. I want to do that reuse. So where do I put that language? Do I send that to you? We insert that later or what?
It would not be inserted. It would not be inserted. It would be part of this motion that is part of these minutes.
Okay.
All right. Now, by doing that, now, Ms. Richardson, please confirm what I'm about to say, and I hope I do it right. If we do it this way, this will also approve the findings of fact from the last meeting, so that we can go ahead and send the official notices out to the applicants so that they can proceed with their permit processes. So that's what is very important here, is that these findings of fact, that they get these in hand so that they can go on with their work.
Okay.
If you do it any other way, we delay it for another 30 days, which could put a prevention and everything for everybody else.
Yeah, I don't want to delay things. All I want to do is make a point. It could just be noted here that I'm concerned more with the data reuse and how that's related to parking than I am the actual parking of that thing. But in reading it in two different lights, they say completely two different things, and so that's where they wanted to put in there. So I'm not attacking you, Rob. You do a great job. I just want to, when I'm concerned about something, make sure that we're clear about what my concern was.
So possibly what you could do is move to approve with the understanding that my statements made at the previous meeting was what the intent was that I wanted to address in a certain context.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would work. That would approve those minutes. You would have that understanding here. and it would still, and it would, and in this way, the findings of fact and conclusions of law do not change because it is what they are.
Yeah.
And everything moves forward.
Okay. I'm fine with that. So do I need any action, Janie, or what am I doing?
Yeah, Mr. Coons, if you could make a motion and note that and be very specific about exactly what you had intended there.
Okay, so I make a motion to approve the minutes and then further denote that as it relates to page 12, second paragraph under board deliberations, my noting for concern is more associated with adaptive reuse in the change of use more so than parking itself.
And then the clerk will put that in these upcoming minutes.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. And I hate to throw a booger in there. I'm here at the last, that 3 hour market, but it was important to me and I appreciate y'all's patience.
Okay, well, no, that's good. This is why we review the minutes. So thank you. We have a motion. May I have a second? I'll second the approval as amended, as if that's the proper term. I always have to ask, this is another roll call vote?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
That's okay.
As usual. So on the motion to approve as amended, as approved with the notation, Mr. Coons.
Approve.
Mr. Swink.
Approve.
Thank you. Ms. Rudisill.
Approve.
Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
That's 5.
Outstanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Richardson, anything for you today?
I don't have anything to report. Catherine may be back with you all next month. So if she is, I just wanted to say it was a pleasure working with you all for the last few months.
Well, it's been our pleasure. Thank you. You've done a great job. She left it in good hands.
Last thing, I won't be here next meeting. That's April 12th, George.
Okay, Mr. Coons is going to be absent on.
I'll be traveling.
Okay, very good. Well, safe travels.
Yep, thank you.
Anything else from anyone?
Chairman Swink, there was a lot of conversation about parking, as you know, today on the Ash project.
Yep.
I have to come back and tell the board how lengthy the process is when it comes to applying for the stickers for parking in neighborhoods. Someone needs to be muted.
Can everybody else be muted except Mr. Butler because it's creating a lot of background noise?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Would you please restate it?
Yes, there was a lot of discussion about parking today concerning the Ash project. Could staff come back and tell the board, maybe the next meeting, how long the process takes when it comes to applying for a sticker program for a neighborhood, to give us an idea of what's involved in that and how long that takes? That'd be good. That would be good to know.
Yes, sir. This is Justin. We can certainly give you all, prepare some detail for you all and describe the process in detail. Bring that back to you next meeting.
Good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anything else from anyone? Okay. Interesting meeting today. Some interesting conversation. So thank you all for your work, and we will talk again in a month. Stay well.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye all. Thanks, everybody.